Hey everyone, how's it going? On this week's video, I'll be talking about common causes behind knee pain. Now, let me be clear, I am not talking about structural considerations, so if you fractured a bone, tore a muscle, or have some kind of abnormal growth, this is not the video for you. However, if maybe you've gone to see a few people and imaging is inconclusive or comes back negative, listen up. We cannot talk about the knee without discussing the foot and the ankle complex as well as the hips. They're highly dependent on one another. Nothing in the body works in isolation. So if we're talking about the knee, we have to talk about how the knee interacts with the floor, i.e. the foot. When we're discussing the foot, the best way to load the foot is through supination. What the hell does that mean? So pretend this is your foot and this is the ball of your foot. We are going to press down with the ball of the foot and we're going to find some pressure on that lateral heel, right? This is my right foot. So now we're going to take this first metatarsal bone, the bone behind the ball of the foot, and we are going to abduct it out to the right. As we do that, you can see what happens to my wrist, which serves as the ankle in this demonstration. It starts to externally rotate and lateralize. What does this do to the knee? Well, the tibia or the shin bone starts to now externally rotate this way. So ankle is lateralizing, tibia is externally rotating out. The knee, if going unchecked, is also going to externally rotate, and so is the femur. If we continue this trajectory up the chain of the body, what we're going to do is we're just going to have a free-for-all where everything lateralizes over to the right. So you can see that if we are going to externally rotate some pieces of the body, we're going to have to find some sort of checks and balances in order to keep us from tipping over to that loaded side. And that's what the hip is trying to do. Whereas the tibia will go out with external rotation, we're going to try to get the femur and the hip to internally rotate to try to cancel out that motion, to find a decent place for the knee to exist without too much shearing forces. All right, so here's the issue. When a lot of people coach movement, when a lot of people coach single leg activities like lunges or single leg deadlifts, they like to say activate, squeeze your glutes, or push the knee out. All right, so now here's the issue. If we are trying to use glutes on a stance leg, meaning on a leg that's by itself, it's supporting the weight of your body, well, what do the glutes do? In a previous video, I talked about how they are horrible hip extenders or hip extensors. They are fabulous external rotators. So when we are in stance on one side, if I am loaded on my right leg right now, and I use my glutes, I contract my glutes, their primary function in this position is to push me over to my left. So my glutes are trying to get me to unload my right and load my left. But if we're doing stance, if we're doing lunges, like we never want the lunges or the single leg deadlift to be unloaded. We want to stay on that leg, right? Because we're training balance, we're training single leg activities, we're training health and stuff. We have to be able to match hip mechanics with foot mechanics so that the knee doesn't start going any which way, right? The knee needs to be able to be stabilized by these two other structures. If we lateralize too much to the right, then we're just going to start tensing up quads, tensing up back, tensing up a whole bunch of things, even jaw, in order for us to not fall. Because the brain and the nervous system doesn't want the brain in a free-for-all. It wants it fairly upright. So when we are not efficient at managing gravitational forces by this coupling action, tibia E-R-ing, hip I-R-ing, then what our brain's going to do is say, you know what, screw this, I'm just going to add localized tension to a bunch of different places, and we are going to remain upright. And it's this constant loading, this constant tensing of various structures that leads to pulling on and manipulating on the knee joint. So if you have medial knee issues, that could be something from an adductor, inner thigh muscle that's just eccentrically loaded or stretched long. I really hate that term, but it's on eccentric load, right? It's not in the best position to leverage and stabilize that knee on its side of the equation. If we feel lateral knee issues, common cause for that could be over-reliance on quads, on quadriceps, meaning it's harder for you to feel medial hamstrings, it's harder for you to feel adductor groups in order to manage stance on one leg. So quads are going to be pulling and externally rotating on the knee joint, and an adductor, if it's not able to leverage itself appropriately, then it's getting stretched long, and that's why you may feel medial knee issues. Again, this isn't the be-all end-all of things, but these are often overlooked by a lot of people when they're trying to figure out and trying to get to the root of their knee issues. Another point of order, if we're always trying to get people to rest more on their heels, to increase heel pressure on a bunch of different exercises, and most coaches will want this, right? On your squats, on your deadlifts, single leg activities, doesn't really matter. We want more heel pressure. Like that's generally accepted on most counts. I can't think of anyone that would not want to do that. Think of it this way. I've left my pelvis model at home, but right hip, right femur. As we internally rotate, you can see that this will actually help us. It'll be easier for us to go and find increased heel pressure. We'll be able to shift back more appropriately. We'll be able to leverage hamstrings and adductors to help us manage things, right? But if we cue glutes and we cue knees out, so this, my elbow is the knee, as that rotates out, look at what's happening at the hip joint, right? So now we are not able to load on and compress that hip. If we're trying to add weight, if we're trying to manage gravity, can you not see that internal rotation is actually a much safer and more stable dynamic than external rotation for the purposes of the hip complex? And yet this is what we try to coach for so many of us. We try to get people to feel glutes. We try to people to get to push their knees out. We're doing all of these things in order to facilitate ER because it's what we've been exposed to for so many years. Another thing to consider, but what about those of us that actually have true knee valgus? So knee valgus is when the knee falls in, right? Generally what happens with a lot of cases of knee valgus is that that individual has lost the ability to authentically internally rotate. So their body, being an incredibly adaptive machine, is trying to give them fake internal rotation. And fake internal rotation kind of looks just like pulling in the knee. But you can pull in and adduct that knee valgus, without really acquiring true hip internal rotation. So it's kind of like, what are you using to leverage this position? It matters what structures you are using, because I can just squeeze my knees together and then I'm going to fire more the inferior aspects of my adductor, but then maybe my knee's going to get pissed off because of that. Now, if I can leverage high adductor, if I can leverage that from the area of the groin, I'm going to be able to feel that and actually compress that hip socket. Okay? So these are some of the common causes, common issues surrounding obscure knee pain, is that we are not leveraging the mechanics in a way that would provide optimal efficiency against gravity. We are allowing glutes, quads, external rotation, abduction to try to run the show, or we're not even aware of any of these things and we're trying to get fake internal rotation via adduction of the knee. So that's all for this week. If you guys have any questions, feel free to drop them down in the comment section below, and I will see everyone next week. Take care.